Georgia has towns that feel like unsent messages. One moment they're real, obvious, everybody knows they're there. The next moment it's blank, like they never existed. In today's 13 ghost towns in Georgia, some places were plotted with hundreds of lots. Some were official ports of entry, some manufactured for war, and some were gold hubs that pulled people in fast. Then each one vanished in its own way. Some got drained the moment the county seat moved away. Some are left with nothing but a cemetery and a few dozen headstones, like the last address book of a broken community. Don't miss number 1. It's a place with a name on the map, but when you stand there, all you'll see are railroad tracks, trucks, and empty space. Whoa. Number 13, Old Ebenezer. Old Ebenezer sounds like it should be a quiet little pioneer success story. Instead, it is the kind of place that teaches you one brutal colonial truth in Georgia. If you pick the wrong water, you lose, even if your faith is iron. Around 1734 to 1736, a German-speaking Protestant group often called the Salzburgers came to the Georgia colony to get away from religious persecution. A lot of records describe the first wave as roughly 300 people. They named the settlement Ebenezer, meaning stone of help. Basically a way of saying God got us this far. And for about 2 years, that name had to work overtime. Here's the problem. Old Ebenezer sat in Effingham County near Ebenezer Creek, about 25 miles northwest of Savannah. On a map, that seems fine. In real life, the waterway did not deliver what a community needs to survive and trade. Navigation was harder than expected, the land did not cooperate, sickness hit early, and the kind of losses that make a whole group start thinking like engineers instead of dreamers piled up. So they asked to move, and they did. The entire community relocated closer to the Savannah River, to what people later call New Ebenezer or just Ebenezer, where commerce and growth actually made sense. If you go looking for Old Ebenezer today, you are not going to find a row of cabins leaning in the woods like a movie set. It is more like a historic and archaeological site, foundations, traces, and early burial ground energy. The creepiest detail is also the safest one because it is just history doing what history does. A marker at the Jerusalem Cemetery in New Ebenezer says the earliest burials from 1734 were once at Old Ebenezer. Then in 2011, archaeologists found many early graves, estimated in the hundreds, stretching beyond the current brick wall boundary of the Jerusalem Cemetery. So let me ask it the simple way. If a town lives for 2 years, moves its whole soul downriver, and the dead still do not fit neatly inside the fence, was it ever really gone? Or did it just change addresses? Number 12, Frederica. Frederica was not built to be charming. It was built to be a warning. Back in 1736, James Oglethorpe laid out a planned town and a fort on St. Simon's Island because Georgia had a real problem. Florida was Spanish, and Spain was not exactly sending friendly postcards. Frederica was basically a frontline outpost with manners. Even the name flexes a little. It was tied to Prince Frederick, son of King George II. Like the place was stamped with royal ownership before the first cannon ever cooled. And this was not some sleepy village with a bell and a garden. At its peak, the town around the fort hit about 1,000 residents, and roughly 630 British soldiers were stationed there. That is the kind of number that changes the air. You do not have that many uniforms in one place unless somebody expects trouble. In 1742, trouble showed up. Oglethorpe's forces fought Spanish troops in battles around the island, with the most famous one remembered as the Battle of Bloody Marsh. They pushed the invasion back, and after that, the pressure eased hard. Good news for Georgia, bad news for Frederica. Because once the threat fades, the money fades. Around 1749, the garrison was disbanded and Frederica's economy started folding in on itself. The town had been living on purpose, payroll, supply chains, repairs orders, all the stuff that keeps a frontier place breathing. Take that away and it is like turning off a generator in the middle of the night. Then 1758 happened. A fire tore through and destroyed most of what was left. After that, the remaining buildings thinned out and eventually people just stopped coming back. What you get today is not a ghost town you stroll through like a set. It is Fort Frederica National Monument, protected by the National Park Service, and it feels more like you are walking through the outline of a story. Archaeological foundations, the traces of streets, remnants of barracks, walls that do not fully stand anymore, and the King's Magazine, that old storehouse for ammunition and supplies, sitting there like the last locked drawer in an abandoned desk. So here is the question that sticks. If a town is born for war, does it ever learn how to live in peace? Or does it simply wait around until history stops needing it? Number 11, Griswoldville. Griswoldville was never a gold rush town, it was a work town, the kind of 19th century industrial village that grows up around a factory whistle and a railroad timetable. This place latched onto the Central of Georgia Railway on purpose because Samuel Griswold knew exactly what he was doing. He was a major cotton gin manufacturer in the South, and he brought his shop and iron casting operation here to stay close to the rail line. Translation. If the tracks were the bloodstream, Griswoldville was built to be the heart-pumping product out. And then the Civil War turned that heart into a target. Here's the detail that makes Griswoldville feel different from the usual dusty ghost town story. This was wartime industry for the Confederacy. Cotton gins, yes, but also revolvers. Not just tools for farms, but tools for fighting. So when Sherman left Atlanta and moved toward Savannah, war did not drift past like weather. It walked up the tracks. According to the American Battlefield Trust Summary, around November 21, 1864, Union cavalry captured a train carrying military supplies near Griswoldville and burned some of the factories in the industrial complex. One day you're an industrial village feeding a war machine, the next day your own machinery is on fire. And it did not stop there. On November 22, 1864, the Battle of Griswoldville erupted, often described as the first battle on Sherman's march to the sea. It ended in a Union victory. The estimated total casualties land around 712, with about 650 on the Confederate side and about 62 on the Union side. Numbers like that do not just mark a battle, they stamp a place. After the war, Griswoldville did not really come back. The industrial community was not rebuilt, no second act, no slow recovery, just an empty space where momentum used to live. Today, what is left is Griswoldville Battlefield, managed as a historic battlefield site with markers, memorials, and interpretive signs. You are not walking through a town as much as you are walking through an explanation. And that is the eerie part, honestly. Griswoldville was a railroad factory town where people cast iron and built cotton gins. Then war passed through in a handful of days and turned it into a name on a memorial sign. So if you stand there long enough, you start wondering, how many places are alive right now only because history has not noticed them yet? Number 10, Scull Shoals. This place used to be a whole town powered by water feeding hundreds of workers, and then the very mud from cotton fields basically buried the dam, buried the shoals, and left brick walls standing in the woods like evidence of a mistake that took decades to finish. That is Scull Shoals, a mill village on the Oconee River that was once one of the bigger water-powered industrial spots in Greene County. Now it sits inside the Oconee National Forest, and what you get is this weird experience where you are walking a quiet trail, and suddenly you are staring at industrial ruins, like the forest forgot to cover its tracks. Scull Shoals is a good story because it did not die from running out of something shiny. It died from nature and the very cotton economy that helped it grow. Floods and sedimentation changed the river's shape over time, so the water power that made everything work stopped being dependable. Back in 1782, the area was recorded as first settled, and it grew into one of Greene County's big mill towns. By 1796, they were serious enough to build a fort to protect the settlement. In the early 1800s, the waterworks expanded. Grist mills, cotton-related mills, the whole ecosystem of turning raw stuff into survival. And in 1811, this site is often introduced as being tied to Georgia's first paper mill. Imagine the confidence in that era. We are going to tame a river and build the future right here. Then the river started writing its own edits. The 1800s brought a chain of fires, floods, and the strain of the Civil War era. The town weakened, rebuilt, weakened again, and in 1887 a recorded great flood hit, and after that the water-powered operation was basically considered no longer viable because the river kept filling in and shifting. The same fields that made money upstream were also sending silt downstream, slowly choking the very system that needed clean moving water. It is like the town got paid and punished by the same crop. Today it is the Scull Shoals Historic Site, managed by the U.S. Forest Service. It is open during the day. You walk it on a trail, and they are very clear about one thing: do not take artifacts. Do not pocket a souvenir, which is honestly the most haunted rule a place like this can have because it sounds less like a guideline and more like a warning. Don't touch what isn't yours. Out there you can still see a few low walls and stone supports, some old piers and a small brick arch bridge crossing a ditch beside the mill area, and you just stand there thinking, how many towns are still alive right now? Not because they are strong, but because the river has not changed its mind yet. Number 9. Auraria. Auraria is the kind of name that sounds like it should still glow. It comes from aurum, Latin for gold, so you expect a real old street, a proud little district, something that still feels like a town. But Auraria is mostly a lesson. A boomtown does not have to explode to die. Sometimes it just gets quietly drained of purpose until it turns into a place people drive past without knowing what they missed. Back in the early 1830s, Auraria sat in Lumpkin County, southwest of Dahlonega, and it surged with the Georgia Gold Rush. The gold lottery of 1832 poured gasoline on the rush, distributing land in the Cherokee country newly controlled by Georgia and pulling people in fast. At its early peak, Auraria hit around 1,000 people. For a brief moment, it mattered so much that it even served as a temporary county seat when Lumpkin County was first formed. Courthouse energy, paperwork, merchants, the whole small-town power grid. Then the plug got pulled. The county seat shifted to Dahlonega, and the jobs and commerce followed the court like it was gravity. Auraria did not burn down. It got bypassed, and Dahlonega had another advantage Auraria could not match. Dahlonega became the bigger gold center and later got tied to the federal gold mint story people always mention. If Dahlonega had a mint, Auraria was trying to win with vibes. When gold fever moved west, California and beyond, miners left Georgia, and boomtowns like Auraria faded even faster. A Georgia Historical Society marker says the gold mined in the Cherokee country from 1829 to 1839 was about $20 million in value at the time. That hunger had to land somewhere. Auraria was one of its short-lived homes. Today it is more like a rural crossroads with a few traces. The gold did not vanish. The attention did. Number 8. Sunbury. Sunbury feels like a town the marsh erased on purpose. It sits in Liberty County on the south bank of the Medway River, right in that coastal Georgia wetland world where the air is heavy and everything looks like it has secrets. And here is the part people miss. Sunbury was not a tiny dock. It was founded in 1758 with an agreement dated June 20th, 1758, and by the 1760s it was recognized as a port of entry. That meant ships, money, and status. For a while it even competed with Savannah for sea trade. The town was laid out with almost 500 lots, each about 70 feet by 130 feet, arranged around 3 squares in that Savannah style. In 1773, Sunbury had 56 ships enter the port. Savannah had 160 the same year, sure, but 56 tells you Sunbury had real traffic. It was not pretending. Then history started stacking hits. Sunbury became Liberty County's first county seat in 1784, incorporated in 1791, and in 1792 they opened Sunbury Road, described as one of the longest post-revolutionary wagon roads in Georgia, connecting inland life to the port. It should have been unstoppable, but it was not. Sunbury had Fort Morris for defense, and local summaries say the British occupied the area, the town was damaged, and it never fully recovered. Afterward, Savannah grew stronger and pulled trade away. Add in an 1824 hurricane, yellow fever, and the courthouse moving elsewhere, and Sunbury was mostly abandoned before about 1860. Today, the town is basically gone. What stays is Sunbury Cemetery, one of the few remaining structures with around 34 markers, oldest 1788, latest 1911, a port turned into a quiet row of names. Number 7, Abercorn. If I told you there was a village in Georgia that vanished so completely the only thing left is its name on a creek, would you believe me? And the weird part is, it is not deep in the mountains or hidden in some forgotten corner. It sat not far from Savannah, right where you would assume every inch of history has already been tagged, labeled, and turned into a tour stop. Abercorn was one of the earliest settlement points in the Georgia colony. The Georgia Historical Society says it was laid out in 1733, planned on paper like a real place with a future. 10 families were assigned to it, which sounds small until you remember what assigned meant back then. This was not a neighborhood choice. This was survival logistics. Then 1734 hit, and a new wave arrived. When the Salzburgers, German-speaking Protestants fleeing religious persecution, came to Georgia, a bunch of them were basically parked at Abercorn temporarily. Not because it was great, but because it was there. They were waiting for homes to be built at Ebenezer and for the route inland to open. Reverend John Martin Balsius stayed with them during that waiting period, which tells you something about the mood. If the pastor is camping with you, it is not a vacation. It is a holding pattern. The easiest way to picture Abercorn is as a colonial waiting room in the swamp. A stopover, a place where people pitched temporary shelters, counted supplies, and stared towards the interior like the next step might either save them or swallow them. And it turns out Abercorn was not built for long-term life. It was not suitable for a real settlement, so it got abandoned. Here is the part that keeps it eerie without needing any ghost story seasoning. Every physical trace disappeared. No charming ruins, no lonely chimney, no church foundation you can stand on for a photo. Nothing. Just the name surviving in Abercorn Creek, like the land kept the label but erased the handwriting underneath. So when you hear that creek name today, you are basically hearing a town's last breath. And it makes you wonder, how many other stops did people build out here that were never meant to last? And how close are we walking to them without realizing it? Number 6, Hardwicke. This place was once picked as a future capital of Georgia. Then it got brushed aside, and by 1824, the whole town was down to one person still hanging on. One, that is not a decline. That is a slow, polite erasing. Hardwicke was a colonial town on the Great Ogeechee River, about 14 miles from the Atlantic. On paper, it looked like a winner. The river bends there in a way that makes the land feel almost like a peninsula. A natural setup that screams strategy, trade, protection, the whole colonial dream. When it started in 1754, it was called Georgetown, named for the Prince of Wales. A year later, Georgia's first royal governor, John Reynolds, renamed it Hardwicke, after his powerful relative, the Earl of Hardwicke, who was Lord High Chancellor of England. That rename tells you the vibe. This was not supposed to be a sleepy outpost. This was supposed to matter. In 1755, Reynolds picked Hardwicke as the site for the capital, and even praised it as a fit place for the capital. Imagine hearing that in a brand new colony. You would start building your life like the future is guaranteed, except it was not. By 1761, Governor Sir James Wright decided the capital would not move from Savannah, and when that capital dream got shut down, Hardwicke lost its biggest reason to grow. It kept trying to stay relevant. In 1793, Bryan County was created and Hardwicke became the county site, the county seat. That is the kind of title that keeps a town breathing. Then 1797 hit, and the county site was moved to Crossroads, the area we now call Richmond Hill. That was the second unplug. After that, people drifted off. The strategic shine was gone. The paperwork traffic was gone, and the town just kept shrinking until it was basically empty. There was even an attempt to revive Hardwicke in 1866. It did not stick, and that is how Hardwicke became one of Georgia's dead towns. Number 5, Petersburg. Petersburg was the kind of town you would bet on. It sat upriver at a perfect spot, right where the broad river pours into the Savannah River. That is not just pretty geography, that is leverage. In 1786, a man named Dionysius Oliver founded it and named it after Petersburg, Virginia, his hometown. And for a while, that name actually meant something. From the late 1700s into the 1820s, Petersburg was a frontier community with real business and real social life. Lawyers, doctors, politicians, the sort of people who do not show up unless a place has momentum. It got big, not cute little river town, big. At one point, it was considered the third largest town in Georgia, behind only Savannah and Augusta. And it was laid out with a plan that sounds almost too neat. 86 lots, each a half acre. You can picture it: a grid, porches, dust, deals happening in daylight, gossip happening at night. Petersburg also had a specific job in the river economy. It was a tobacco inspection center. Tobacco was packed into wooden barrels called hogsheads, then shipped downriver on something called Petersburg boats. These were flat-bottom boats built to carry about 10 to 15 hogsheads at a time. They moved with the current and long poles, and it usually took 5 to 6 people to handle one. A run down to Augusta and back could take about a week. So imagine the rhythm. The river doing the heavy lifting, the crew sweating, the town living off the traffic like a diner off a highway. Then the highway moved. By around 1854, Petersburg was down to just 3 families. 3, from third largest in the state to basically a handful of stubborn holdouts. Today, Petersburg is a major historical attraction at Bobby Brown State Park. And this is the part that feels like the town is playing hide and seek. When the water level drops, you can see foundations and remnants from the lake's edge, like the town is still there just underwater waiting for the river to exhale. Number 4, Burton. If you stand on Lake Burton on a day when the water is flat like glass, you will see nothing but a calm resort lake, boats, cabins, weekend energy. But right under that surface, there used to be a town of nearly 200 people, with a post office, a store, a church. And it disappeared because a dam gate closed at the end of 1919. That is the part that messes with your head. No war, no plague, just paperwork, a project, and then the water rises, like a slow curtain. Burton sat in Rabun County at the meeting point of Dix Creek and the Tallulah River, up in the upper Tallulah Valley. Local histories say it first went by Powellsville, formed by Scotch-Irish settlers in the early 1800s, then later took the name Burton after Jeremiah Burton, the man tied to the general store and the post office. That sounds small and ordinary, but this town had momentum, and it came in 3 waves. First, gold. This area was caught in the North Georgia Gold Rush, and there is even a recorded gold discovery site in Rabun County described as just north of Burton. Second, service life. Burton became a support point for mountain living and for mining activity around the region, including supplying the corundum mines over at Tate City. Third, timber and the railroad era. Logging brought transport infrastructure, and Burton shifted into a mountain transfer point, not just a gold town. By the early 1900s, it had around 200 people and was described as the second largest town in Rabun County. It had a Burton post office established in 1875, and that post office shut down in 1916, which already feels like the town was sensing the change before the water arrived, because Burton did not fade, it got converted. In 1917, a hydroelectric and reservoir project rolled in. Land was bought up, families moved out, and then late in 1919, the dam closed and the lake rose and swallowed the town. When a place disappears underwater, does it become history, or does it become a secret you are literally boating over? Number 3, Jacksonboro. Jacksonboro, sometimes spelled Jacksonboro, sounds like it should be bigger than it is. It was the first county seat of Scriven County, officially incorporated as the town of Jacksonboro on February 16, 1799, and named after James Jackson, who was Georgia's governor at the time. For roughly 50 years, this place was the trading center for a wide rural stretch. If you lived out in the fields and you needed anything official or social, Jacksonboro was where you ended up. And here's the thing about 19th century Georgia. The county seat is not just a title. It is oxygen. Courthouse, land records, deeds, paperwork, lawyers, inns, all of it clusters around that one decision. So when the county seat leaves, the town does not just slow down. It gets unplugged. The life that felt permanent turns into dust and distance. Jacksonboro also carried a reputation. Vanishing Georgia captured the vibe and described it as a rough frontier town, even rumored to have more taverns than houses. That is not a statistic, that is a mood, the kind of place where the noise starts early, the arguments last late, and a preacher walking in is not exactly greeted like a guest. Which brings us to the legend Vanishing Georgia tells. In 1821, an itinerant minister named Lorenzo Dow came to preach. The crowd, fueled by the taverns, disrupted him. Dow stormed into a bar and smashed a whiskey barrel, and the story says he was nearly beaten for it. A man named Seaborn Goodall pulled him out and gave him shelter. And when Dow left town, he stood on a bridge and asked God to punish Jacksonboro, except for the Goodall house. Then comes the part that people repeat because it feels like a warning wrapped in folklore. A few years later, the story claims every building in town vanished, and only that house remained. That surviving building becomes the symbol, not just of Jacksonboro's decline, but of the idea that a town can be cursed by its own reputation and then finished off by one simple civic change. So let me ask you, was Jacksonboro destroyed by bad behavior, by a preacher's curse, or by the quieter, colder force of losing its county seat and watching the paperwork walk away? Number 2, Oscarville. People love to tell Oscarville as a drowned town story, like it was a normal little place, then water rolled in and swallowed it. End of movie. But the scarier truth is this. Oscarville was drowned in the community's memory back in 1912. The water only showed up decades later. Oscarville is often mentioned as a black community in the New Bridge area of northeastern Forsyth County, near the Hall County line. It existed in the long stretch after the Civil War and through Reconstruction, rooted in farming and everyday community life. Not some abstract dot on a map, a small town but a real network. Churches, schools, jobs, neighbors who knew each other's routines and who showed up when life got heavy. Then 1912 happened. Forsyth County went through a chain of racially motivated violence and upheaval that pushed most black residents out of the county. Or the Atlanta History Center's Forsyth 1912 project confirms that this expulsion happened and that it left a long legacy of tension. Around that time, the county had about 1,000 black residents. And after the events, that community was largely gone. That is the part people skip when they jump straight to the lake. It is easier to blame water than to name what people did. So when you hear the popular version, a thriving black town got flooded and now it's haunted, you understand what got twisted. The community was dismantled first by violence and forced departure in 1912. The drowning came later when the government built Buford Dam on the Chattahoochee River for flood control, hydropower, and water supply, creating the reservoir we now call Lake Lanier. And yes, that makes Oscarville a ghost town in the drowned town sense. There is no ruined main street you can walk, no broken storefront for your camera. The place tied to that old community sits under the lake bed, which is exactly why the story sticks. You cannot go there to check it. You can only float above it. Number 1, Constitution. Constitution is the kind of ghost town that does not even give you the courtesy of ruins. No leaning saloon, no busted church, just a name that refuses to die. DeKalb History Center basically calls it what it is, a label on the map, but no city that exists. And that is the first creepy trick. You cannot visit it like a normal place. You can only stand near it and feel the absence. People still talk about it as a pre-Civil War community on the south side of Atlanta, tucked along the South Moreland Avenue area, just south of East Atlanta Village. And the old boundary situation was honestly strange. Constitution was drawn like a circle. with half in Fulton County and half in DeKalb County, like the town could not decide what it belonged to. That is not poetic. That is administrative weirdness. And administrative weirdness is how places quietly disappear. There was a jail there once. That detail matters because it leaves a shadow even when the buildings are gone. Today, Metro State Prison sits near where the old jail was, which feels like history doing a dark little rhyme. Then Atlanta started growing like Atlanta does. When the city annexed the Thomasville area in 1952, it basically took about half of what was left of Constitution. Not with a dramatic battle, with a line on a document. That is the kind of ending you do not feel until you realize nobody says the town name out loud anymore. So what is Constitution now? The best way to understand it is as a ghost hamlet trapped between rails and roads. There is proof it was real. On a 1911 DeKalb County map by Rand McNally, the name Constitution shows up clearly as a place marker. That is such a strong shot because it is not rumor. It is ink. And even today, Constitution Road is still a known railroad crossing that local news mentions, which gives you a perfect visual language. Train horns, traffic stuck, the kind of pause where you stare at the tracks and think, this is where a town name survived longer than the town. DeKalb History Center describes the area now as a transportation corridor with trucking businesses, a landfill, and incarceration facilities. And that is the punchline nobody laughs at. Constitution did not become a cute historical district. It became infrastructure. So here is the question. If a place is only a name, and the name is stuck beside a railroad crossing, does that make it less real, or just harder to mourn? Georgia has ghost towns that don't need crumbling buildings to feel eerie. Some got drained of power. Some got swept by war. Some sank underwater, and some are nothing but a name beside the railroad. If you had to pick one to visit in daylight, which would you choose and why? Drop it in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.